welcome to Flexpo Digital. I'm Madeline Cole, the founder of the Flexpo event series, and the next session that we're looking at is the topic of wellbeing and mental health. Now, I think of all the topics that we've covered, this one is arguably one of the most important on today's agenda, given the current situation. So as I speak, we're currently in various stages of lockdown across the UK. We're looking at potentially the cancellation of Christmas, which is horrifying for a lot of people, I'm sure, and potentially also a further circuit breaker 2-week lockdown. So we're still in a state of flux with no end in sight, and wellbeing is of utmost importance currently across the nation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the speakers that are joining me today. So I'll hand over to everybody individually, as they do a much better job themselves than I can do them justice. So David, if we kick off with you, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Blackburn, and I am the Chief People Officer of the Financial Services Compensation Scheme.
Thank you very much, David. Adeife, if we move on to you.
Good morning, everyone. I am the Inclusion and Culture Chain Manager at the CBI.
Thank you very much. And Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda Kirby. I'm a Profit and Developmental Disorders and CEO of Do It Solutions.
Thank you all very much. So we've got a really great mixture of skills across the table with our panel discussion today. So thank you all so much for giving up your time. Now, just to tell our audience what we're going to tell you, to see if this is the session for you or not, the topics that we're going to be covering are how to manage the pace and magnitude of change, and with no end in sight, as I mentioned previously, how to build resilience and to develop a toolkit to overcome stress, anxiety, isolation and burnout. We'll also be looking at cultivating a mindset of opportunity and planning for an uncertain future, and flexible working, of course, and how we can support wellbeing through the use of flexible working and how to go about approaching that. So if we kick off with what is stress? So Amanda, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay, because I think it's really important to talk about the feelings that everybody has at the moment, and really kind of, what we're feeling, how to categorise that.
Sure. I think there's two things. There's stress and distress. And often we can feel stress. We can feel quite energized when we're going in to do something new. We start a new job. We're going back to work. If you're returning to work, some of those things can be quite energizing to get back into a new project. That's stress. That can be good for us. And it's a bit like a curve that as we move up, if we get to the peak of it, we can start to feel agitated and we can become distressed. So distress is when we're feeling like we're not coping. And that's what some people are feeling. And I think at the moment, if you think about that, a bucket, and we've got a bucket which has given us cognitive capacity to cope. We've each got this bucket. If it gets to overfull point, we can't cope and it overflows. And if there's a gap at the top, then we can cope. Now, normally, we've got things flowing in. We've got major life events, everyday events, but in the moment events going in. You've got a tap at the bottom that empties it. Now, usually, the things that flow in go at different rates and times. And the bottom bit, which is like meeting your friends and going out and having chatter at work, the stuff that helps you cope, we've got a restriction on the tap at the bottom, and for lots of people, lots flowing in all at once. So that can be why sometimes we feel like, why today? Why now? Why have I just gone on one? What happened there? Because our buckets were running full with our capacity at full, and it takes a drip for it to overflow. And that's really important, to recognise what's flowed in now and in the past, and just be kind to ourselves. So that self-reflection is really important.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I think there's been an awful lot of talk on certainly groups that I'm involved in, with people kind of saying, I just feel really like I've got no energy, and I don't want to go to work, and I don't want to get out of bed, and I can't be bothered to make conversations with people. And I think it's really important to recognise that that's not a normal state of feeling, and that's all part of a negative wellbeing set to feel like that. So I think that's really important. Just sorry, before we go any further, I did mean to add to our audience, if anybody has any questions, please do feel free to type them in the Q&A box at the bottom. It does pop up in a separate chat window, so if you can't see it, look for Q&A and click on that, and make sure that you've allowed pop-ups to allow it, and our speakers are available to answer any questions as we go along. So thank you so much, Amanda. If we could move on to David, I'd like to talk about how much responsibility should an individual, an employee, take for managing their own well-being, and how much onus is on the employer. I think this is quite a controversial topic in light of the fact that we're all currently glued to Zoom all day if we are at work.
So, Maddie, it's interesting that I think actually, if we go right back to basics, the employer does have a responsibility in law. It's enshrined in the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 and the Health and Safety Work Regulations 1999. It says it's the employer's responsibility to create, as much as they possibly can, a safe working environment, and that includes not just our physical well-being, but our mental well-being. And I think that the challenge for lots of organisations over the course of the last year is we've suddenly gone from an environment where people are leaving home every day and coming into an office environment, which is a very controlled environment by the employer, to everyone working at home. And suddenly, actually, how do you maintain connection? How do you monitor performance? How do you have coaching conversations? All of those things around how you lead and engage with your people are suddenly new and different. I think it absolutely continues to be a massive part of the employer's responsibility. And at the FSCS, we have 3 pillars to our approach to flexible working, or this hybrid working environment. The first is around communication, the second is environment, and the third is well-being. And I think that Amanda made a really good point. Equally, I think around the bucket, and I love that analogy, is that, one of the things I think that we all noticed that we were doing right at the very start, both employees and employers, was that we were trying to recreate the working environment virtually. So in the first couple of weeks, if you're very lucky like I am to have an amazing business manager who runs my diary, my first month in lockdown was exactly the same as it would have been if I'm in the office. Now, the reality of that is that, I was sitting in a chair from 8 o'clock to 6 o'clock doing this all day. Well, that's not sustainable. So we suddenly went, and that's clearly not sustainable, is it? Because we worked out, and equally, I think line managers were going, I think we were over communicating, because I think we were going, oh my God, we must huddle every day and we must have a check-in at the end of every day. We must overly do it, because we were trying to find the rhythm of what that new world looks like. So I think it comes from a place of great intent. But actually, I love that thing of saying it can be just a drip that tips you over. I don't know about other people on the call, but then when at weekends, friends were saying, oh, let's do a Zoom call, over drinks, I stormed out of more of those, just me, than, I'm surprised I've got any friends left. Because I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be doing this, because I've been doing this all week.
Yeah.
So I think that, and I just throw that in as an example, because I think that absolutely it's it's a relationship. If I went back to basics, what do we talk about in employment law terms? We talk about it being a relationship. And in a relationship, both parties have an equal responsibility, have a massive responsibility, I think, to have an open and honest dialogue. And I think that one of the taps that we have is to talk about it. One of the taps that we have to start letting stuff out of the bucket, I think, is to create a safe space to have open and honest conversations. I think it's massively important for employers for leaders to role model that behavior. I think people, Amanda was saying earlier about, actually, in a weird way, we've been removed from each other, but brought closer together, because actually our communication is more intimate. We see into each other's lives in a way that we didn't before. And I just think at the FSS, we are a mindful employer, and I'll say something a bit later about those resources. But one of the big commitments of being a mindful employer is creating a safe space to talk openly about mental health and mental well-being. And I think being able to say, in relation to are we creating the right sort of environment that makes that possible, and for people to have open and honest conversations. And I think, I found that with my team saying, Maddie, you've worked with me quite a lot. I'm quite an ebullient, personality. And, when lockdown first started, the number of professional contacts who got in touch with me and said, oh my God, are you going to be all right? Because you're the most sociable person I know, and it's going to be an absolute torture for you. And I think just saying that, I think that's the employer's responsibility. The employer shouldn't just be, the employer should be asking the questions and allowing, and it's a shared responsibility. It's not HR's job. I think that's another thing that's changed. I think in this new world, I think we have a collective accountability, checking in with each other and talking to each other about how we're feeling.
Yeah, no, I think that's really valuable, actually. And actually, David, you were a pillar of strength for me during lockdown. I think, you know, you kind of feed off other people, don't you? And it's really important to stay engaged and to speak to people. But equally, I think, you know, for a company like the FSCS, you feel comfortable saying, I'm not coping, and actually there's too many Zoom meetings in my diary, I need to cancel 3 out. But I think, you know, I'm a massive fan of the FSCS and as an organisation and the work that you've done, because you have this really amazing open culture. Adeife, I'd really like to bring you in just to talk about people and actually you also work for an organisation where you've done amazing work to create the same thing. But lots of people watching this aren't necessarily in the same environment where, you know, mental health, there is still a stigma around that. There may not be kind of, you know, a direct route to talking about well-being. Adeife, in your experience, how should people go about talking about it within the workplace or outside of the workplace? Just how do you broach that conversation?
You know, it's interesting because the conversation about mental health, though we talk about it a lot more now, there is still a stigma attached to it, in the sense that depending on who you are and depending on, you know, what you're facing, can have a greater impact or lesser impact. And I think, again, linking back to Amanda's point about the drip, and I think it can push people off the edge. For us as an organization, it's been important that we talk about it. And I think one of the things that we did at the beginning was around creating a mental health and wellbeing survey to check in on people, because actually, where there's an absence of knowledge or there is that disconnect, we're not being able to see each other, or your manager not being in the same room as you, that survey or surveys for organization helps you to get a temperature check of what the organization is doing and the state of play, because it's so difficult for an individual to say this is what's going on. But in some cases where a survey might be anonymous, you're able to kind of disclose what exactly it is that's going on. And we ask questions of, is it workload? Is it family? Is it external factors? You know, what is it that is doing? Because we have to be in a place of conversation and really have that safe space. And employers have a duty to really start asking those questions, whether you're a manager or just business leaders as a whole. And I think it's really important. We talk about, you know, and we've talked about previously in the session around, you know, those coffee chats and some of it being too much or too little of it. And even for us, we decided that we were going to have mental health first aiders, because actually there's a role for them, and we're training our staff on being mental health first aiders so that they can support their the other colleagues as well. And it's for managers as well as your peers, because I think there is something around that safe space. Once we start to normalize something, it's not an add-on, it's not oh, I don't know if I can talk about it. It's a part of the ecosystem of the organization. And for us, that is so important. And we talk about being mindful and creating that safe space. And we talk about, you know, a shared responsibility. And it's rightly so. It's no longer HR's job solely to be driving, you know, the conversations on mental health. I remember where the dial really turned when a couple of years ago, our HR director came out and said to the business, I suffer from mental health. And these are the things that I go through. And these are the challenges I face on a daily basis. And you sat there and it was quite, I call it like an awakening, because then really everyone had to sit up and realize, okay, so we can talk about this. It is okay. There is not going to be a taboo. It's not going to be, you know, looked at as that I can't perform. It's not going to be a thing of, or maybe I shouldn't be in this organization, because you want to work with organizations that are progressive. You want to be in a part of an organization where you feel that there are some days I'm not going to have it all together. And I know for me as a mum, there are some days where if your child doesn't sleep in the night, or if something is going on externally, you're not going to have it together. And this will affect your mental well-being. I say to people, your mental health doesn't just stop at the door. It's part of you. And now more so, where we're all in this environment together, you are in the place sometimes that can even add to it. And you're doing your work and you're trying to balance family life or so many other juggling things, and it's so hard, but you have to really be able to talk about it. You know, somebody said to me something the other day. I asked them, how are you doing? And they said to me, that how are you doing has more depth nowadays than just the general, oh, how are you? How's your weekend? Because you're genuinely asking an individual, how are you doing? Because sometimes people just need that one, how are you? And it can really do something to really change their mood. So we encourage our teams and employers to really, in your one-to-ones, even if it's just in the beginning of the conversation, just have those general conversations just to check in. Because for some people, whereas if they're not a family or if they're not living together, they're quite isolated. And so they haven't had people to talk to. They haven't had people to engage with. And so that how are you can be a real game changer for them, because they don't have that. And for some others, it's you're dealing with, when I think about young people, you're dealing with the stress of not knowing if you're going to find a job or not knowing if you are, what the future holds. And I think that's a scary thing for many people. And even thinking about the employees that we deal with, it's the unknown. The unknown scares a lot of people. And it's about how can you help them, even as much as you can, navigate through the unknown, because we're all in this together. No one knows what the end in sight looks like. And so for us as an organization, that's how you start the conversation. You surveys, you use your mental health first aiders, you have well-being days, you offer things like EAP and so on to really help people feel like it's not a unique thing to have such a terrible day or a really hard day. We all go through it. And once we normalize conversations, your culture and your whole being change. And that's really what we're trying to do.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, Amanda.
No, I think it's important that we recognise that distress comes in lots of shapes and forms, because it doesn't mean we're all going to. Some of us will have palpitations, some of us will have sleep disturbance, some of us will have tummy upset, neck pain. So recognising that it doesn't all come in a neat package, and that each one of us will have different feelings at different times. I think that's really important as well, and that how we feel is different from somebody else, and not saying, well, your distress is worse than my distress, because I think that we recognise there was a philosopher thousands of years ago. We're not disturbed by what happens to us, but by our thoughts about what happens to us. It's what's going on in our head and the impact it has on our life. See inside people's heads. So all we can do is, as you say, is be open to conversations. If people want them, offering them, I think is important. It really is.
And some people don't want them, and that's what we've learned. Some people are saying, actually, I don't want to. This is more than what I can give, and you have to be okay with that. The one thing I've learned, especially in this journey, is empathy, and actually really showing that, not sympathy, but empathy, because actually empathy is saying, oh, okay, I'm hearing you. How are you? How can I help you? Not, oh, we're all going through this. Yes, we're all going through this, but at different levels, and the challenges are different. And when we start to have that conversation in an empathetic manner, it changes the conversation, and the individuals who may be closed off may feel like, actually, I want to have this conversation because this individual has, come at it in a different way and a different approach, and that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so many amazing points raised there. One thing I'd like to kind of raise really is language that we use to talk about this. And I think for an employee or somebody that desperately needs to hear somebody say, how are you, and really mean it, and there isn't anybody offering that, how do you approach that? How do you voice how you feel in an era where we are worried about keeping our job, getting another job, feeding our families, managing the balance between children at home, and potentially that's going to happen again. We don't know yet. In a world of such uncertainty and stress around the future, how do you bring it to the table when nobody else is asking? What language do you use to do that?
I think one of the things is showing vulnerability, because if we can show that, and that's one of the things, if anything else, is that you see into people's homes, you see into people's lives, that, I had somebody's cat was walking across their computer screen, and then I had my grandchild run in after a bath, displayed his bottom on the to everyone. So there's areas of vulnerability in your life that you might never have shown before, but actually showing that vulnerability in yourself allows somebody else maybe to have a conversation they might not have had. So I think sharing your vulnerability and being transparent can help others to engage as well.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of, and I've spoken about this, quite a lot during this period, is that the crisis is an accelerator of a lot of debates and conversations that were already existing. So the debate about, the importance, the value of mental health, has been massive, that was already, employers were already talking about it, but this has been massively accelerated. The whole argument about flexible working you know, it seems a little redundant to be talking about, you know, flexible working, whether it works, when we've all been doing it, you know, for the last 9 months in our organisations. Equally, I think, to Amanda's point, this thing about emotionally intelligent leadership is not a new concept. You know, actually, what is it that we need our leaders to demonstrate? We need them to demonstrate empathy. To Aoife's point, we need them to demonstrate vulnerability. We need them to share their stories. You know, to Aoife's point about her HR director, you know, in Time to Talk Day, you know, the annual event where we're encouraged to talk about our mental well-being. You know, I have openly spoken about my own battles with depression in my 20s. And, you know, our CEO last year talked about the grief that she experienced when she lost her mother and how that impacted her performance. So I think that we've known that these things are important. I think they're just more important. And I just think that, and I think that because I equally think it shouldn't be that we're waiting, to your point, you know, what if you're not being asked the question? If you're unfortunate that you work in an organisation where the culture isn't asking you these questions, I think you have to take the, I think to your Amanda's point, I think you have to take the responsibility to show your vulnerability. I think you have to say, you know, because you know, and I think that, you know, some leaders we are getting to a space that they find some of this stuff difficult. It's not their natural sweet spot, but I think that, you know, most people respond to that level of openness and honesty. I think when you share something, more likely often I think is the response is, oh my God, I've had exactly, well, funny you should say that, this is what's happening to me, you know, oh, you've just told me about your grandson's bottom, let me tell you about the time when X, you know, people sharing stories, isn't it? I mean, it's just, I mean, and, you know, Maddie's heard me say this before, our CEO's 11-year-old son, Alex, I mean, I've never met him, but I feel I personally know him. I could tell you what snacks he likes because he's ever endlessly in the cupboard getting biscuits in the various calls that I've had during the course of the year. He now gets on the chair and waves at me and says, hello, David, it's lovely to see you. So it's those sorts of things that I think, you know, makes it easier for people, even if you have to take the first step.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that we underestimate what sharing stories look like. And what it feels like, and actually the impact of those. There is the emotional weight that the individual carries when they're writing or they're verbally saying their story, and then there is how it's felt across the room. But I say I remember when we were talking about a lot of the things earlier on this year, especially with killing of George Floyd and the impact it had on our Black and Asian staff and their mental health and well-being. And I said to our senior leaders, once they share their stories, it's not for them to also carry the emotional weight of that story being shared. Yeah. It's actually, everyone has a responsibility to do something with that, because it takes a lot to share your stories. If you're a working parent, if you're a single parent, if you are someone of a Black or Asian ethnic minority background, depending on what it is, when your story is being shared, you need to be, the environment and the culture needs to also receive that, because it's a lot. And we talk about the fact that when they have shared it, they are also worried, okay, how has this been received? Did it land okay? And the pressures of that can really add to your stress. And so it's about really making sure, are we creating an environment for this individual, or in many individuals, to share their stories? Or are we still inhibiting that by how we respond back to them once they've shared their stories as well?
I think that is such a good point. And I read something the other day that it's better to even say, I don't know what to say, than to say nothing. But, you know, to kind of, you know, have an empty silence. I think if somebody's bared their soul like that, it's so important to take that in and you know, just give thanks for the fact that they've done that. It's quite a brave thing to do, I think. Sorry, Amanda, I interrupted you.
No, I was just thinking about communication is two-way. It really is. Just because you've said it doesn't mean that somebody's understood it. And that reflecting back to sort of just say, I've heard you, you know, that was really brave what you've said, and I'm listening is really important. It really, you know.
And it's so true about sharing stories, because Aoife, earlier on you mentioned about sleep and small children, and I thought I could talk to you all day because that's the biggest bugbear. And on that note, we'd wanted to talk about how to build resilience and how to kind of the tools that you can use to equip yourself to be more resilient and have a greater well-being. And I think sleep, Adeife, I'm sure you'll agree with me, if I haven't slept, I love them dearly, but I also resent them the next day, and then anybody else that comes across my path, because I can't function. So I think good sleep hygiene, which isn't a phrase I even knew about before I became a parent, is critical to well-being. But there must be other tools that you three can share with our audience as well.
Can I just say something about sleep, actually, which is...
Not if you're going to tell us how much you have, David, because
I do get a lot of sleep. I do. Sleep is massively, but really genuinely, and there's lots of great guidance out there online around sleep hygiene and, how you can get better night's sleep and all that good stuff. But I mean, seriously, my team know. I've told the team I'm going to go have a nap in the afternoon. And that's all I wanted to share about. I think we're actually in the middle of the day. I'm like, actually, my brain is a little bit fried from doing this for 4 hours. I'm going to have a lie down. And I didn't do that. I didn't do that. My boss would have been a bit traumatized if I was asleep with my head on the desk in the office environment. But I do think that a resilience thing around, being able to disconnect. So I'd move the sleep thing on and you need discipline to do that. It's so easy. I think we've all had that experience. One of the things, I don't have those 6-hour back-to-back Zoom calls days anymore. I structure my day differently. I think about my start and finish times. I break the day up. Actually, this idea about 9 to 5, it's very easy for it to seep and we're just working longer and longer and longer. So I found, actually within a working day, if I'm not, today I'm in the office, but if I'm working from home, I might start at the same time as my commute. I might start earlier, but I'll finish earlier. Or I might start earlier and I might have 2 hours. I might have a break in the middle of the day and go and do something else. I might go to the walk. I'll go for a walk. I think that is the thing that's really important. You have to be able to go. And I think being disciplined about the boundaries of our working and home lives is really important, of which sleep is a part. But I'm a massive fan of an afternoon nap. That's my...
Lovely.
I'm going to drop you my children in the afternoon so that I can have an afternoon nap.
But I think at the moment, sorry.
No, go on, Amanda, sorry.
I think at the moment people are feeling quite low because of what's going to happen and sort of not sure about the future. So I think breaking things into chunks is helpful. So looking at how do we manage from here to Christmas, And I was thinking the other day that you could do 12 marathons during this time, even standing. So you're doing 10,000 steps a day, 60,000 steps a week, even 3 marathons, So setting yourself some targets. And I take David's point really, because I think at the end of last week, I felt zoomed out, And I did a post on LinkedIn about just what you should do. And I thought, I need to practice this as well. Because of that, it is constant. So going out and seeing green, really important. Lots of evidence to show going for a walk, seeing distance. We're often seeing too close to our computers. And actually, we're set up to see distance. So if we can get out and walk, really, really helpful. And then doing something like a diary. So putting down 3 good things you've done today, whatever they are, even on a bad day, I saw a heron when I went for a walk this morning, that was just great. But, it is even the very small things that you're noticing help you to be able to build that resilience. And that's positive psychology from people like Martin Seligman, who's talked about, positive emotions and engagement and relationships and taking meaning and celebrating your accomplishments. If you baked a cake, don't put it all on Twitter, though, because I think we had that sort of porn going out at the beginning. Everyone was just publicising all the baking.
I couldn't look at another loaf of banana bread. I mean, it was crazy, wasn't it? It was just...
too much. So I call that productivity porn, right? So it was almost like a demonstration of the stuff to prove to people what you were doing, Yeah. But I think celebrating yourself about something that's been good, however much, even if your kids have slept for an extra 10 minutes in the morning, celebrate that.
We do. If they will agree with me, we do.
No,
remember that.
This morning I was very happy when my son overslept. I was like, oh, thank you. No, but it's really important. You know, when looking back at the last couple of months, especially we talk about being mobile and being active and going for a walk. And, you know, we're going into a lot of people have been using this words dark, you know, it's darker earlier, you know, it's more cloudy. And I had a thought about that and what that also means as we go into that period where you don't see the sun shining bright as much as anymore. What do you then do then? Because it's really important. And that's why having those mechanisms within yourself to help you cope through that period. Like I know somebody recommended something earlier, a couple of weeks ago, about happiness hour and finding time to do something you're really happy with. And I think that's so important. Like I remember for me personally, I was one of those people that was told to shield during lockdown. And so I didn't go anywhere. And normally I'm a homebody and I'm just like, I don't need to go out. It's fine. But you get to that point and you're like, now I can't go out. And there's a difference between can't go out and not going out by choice.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think we underestimated that and we didn't understand the impact of what that means. And even as we go forward into a period of unknown, where there might be times where you're not going to be able to go out, how do I keep myself mobile? And because it's so good for our health. I underestimated it earlier on during lockdown, and actually being mobile, having communication, but also having that balance of finding time for you and doing something that truly, whether it's just to sit and watch a movie on Netflix or whether it's just to cook something. I say to people sometimes, for me, it's like it's washing pots. I don't know. It's a weird thing, but I just have a distresser. It's me time and my son is with his dad. And so I could just be in that place of just looking out into the garden. But whatever that looks like, I think everyone needs to know what works for them. It is so important, especially as we go into a period where it does get darker during the day and actually you may not be able to go out because it's too cold or there is an increased lockdown in specific areas. We need to find a way to disconnect and reconnect with ourselves. And I think that's really important.
Music,
music
is
fantastic.
incredibly empowering. So I have a happy playlist now, which probably I won't share completely with everybody, but it does include a bit of Celine Dion, Frank Sinatra and ABBA. So it's an interesting combination.
Oh, good choices, Amanda. Good choices.
A bit of dancing, you know, it's energizing and actually it really lifts your mood. So having that on go, so you've collected those. So when you're having a bad day and you've just put on some music, really can lift people's moods. So I think those are things you can do wherever you are, you know, do you know what I mean? And I think that's the bits is that if we are lockdown, we need to sort of have the Danish approach of hygge, thinking about, you know, lighting the candles and celebrating some of the things which are about winter, maybe rather than being depressed about it's getting dark and we're not going to be able to go out. What can we do apart from just eat? Because we're doing a lot of cooking and eating.
Really, yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny. I think I want to do control certain aspects of my life and I can't stop cooking chicken pies. I'm no cook and I buy pre-done pastry, but then I feel like I've achieved something. My children are eating something nutritious. I've done it myself and I feel really good about it once I've done it. They're sick to death of chicken pies, but they make me feel good, so they're going to keep having them. And it's about the bits you can control, isn't it? It's a bit like setting yourself a marathon target, and I think the social media point as well is so valid because it's so easy to look at what other people are doing and the small snippet of their life that they post and compare yourself to that and think I'm failing. I haven't got my colleague Lynn always says that people will come out of lockdown either super fit or super fat, and we're definitely going to fall into the super fat category. And it's that pressure, you know, of the I'm not doing Joe Wicks or I'm not doing, and it doesn't matter. You have to look at your own bubble and work out what works for you, don't you? Now we're running out of time and there's been some amazing content put forward, so thank you all so much. One of the topics that we always talk about in great detail around well-being is flexible working, and it's almost kind of like David said earlier, become a bit redundant because we are all doing it, but I think there's still an awful lot of employers, just if we can kind of end on this really, who will be talking about, you know, at the moment we're working remotely, but for some people that are interviewing or are looking for a job, that's no good for them. They want to know that they've got that surety in the future because of, you know, the challenges that they have, normally caring, but it could be anything around mental health or anything like that. How do you have that conversation around flexible work and well-being, and how do you take it from, yeah, we're talking about right now, but actually for my own well-being, I need to know that there's an surety and there's a safeguard that the flexible working element will be protected when we're the other side of COVID. Who would like to take that one?
I could take that. I think with the flexible working, I think it's an interesting one because actually one thing I've also learned in looking and talking to our employees is that some people need a balance. There are some people that can't work from home, and it's for a multitude of reasons, whether it's their working or the home environment might not be safe for them to do so. And so there is that opportunity, if they can do, and they could do, and it's safe, that they could work in the office. But then there's also the importance of appreciating what we've learned so far. We have learned that flexible working works, and for some people it's actually made them incredibly productive and more, you know, visible and more aware of what's going on and more engaged, because there is that intention that we have to be engaged. There's that, you're going to have to think about hybrid management, inclusive management. How do you make sure those in the office and those at home all feel part of that journey and that conversation in an important way? And I think that's where we need to get to with flexible working. It's less about we must do this, but more about how does this work for you, and how can we as an organization be inclusive in our approach. We talk about language. You know, I say to people, things like microaggressions, they happen whether you're at home or whether you're not. People can say, oh, well, oh, what is that? Or why is your child making too much noise? You know, those aren't comments you need to necessarily make. It needs to be, how are you doing? How are you coping? It's the compassion that goes behind it. And I think as we begin to think more about being a more compassionate employer, being a more compassionate leaders, being more compassionate managers, it changes the conversation. And so those even coming into the workplace that are, you know, leaving school and needing to find that connect, the connect can still be there, because you're engaging, and it's about asking them, how would you like me to engage with you? Because for them, they've never worked before. This is a brand new thing, and you're telling them they can't see people. And a lot of young people need that interaction. They need to see others. So it's about, how do you build that in a healthy, safe environment, but you're still ensuring what has worked and what has been good, and whatever good looks like for your organization is continuing. I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. We've run out of time, so we will have to end on that note. But Adeife, David, Amanda, you've all been absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom. And
thank you.
Thank you.
Look forward to when we manage to catch you all next time. Thank you all very much for joining us. Please do stay tuned. Please check out the workshops in the other stream, and please do make sure that you join our event chat as well, where we'll be talking more things wellbeing within the next hour. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.